The phone rang at 8:30 on a Tuesday night, and my sister Laura's voice cut straight to the point without even a hello. She told me that if I wanted to join the family Christmas at our parents' house in Colorado, I had to commit right then to babysitting her 5 children for the entire week, not helping out occasionally, but being the primary caregiver while she and her husband Craig went skiing every single day. When I hesitated, trying to process what Shed just demanded, she added coldly that Mom and Dad agreed with her. I stood there in my Seattle apartment, phone pressed against my ear, completely stunned. For the past 6 months, I'd been planning this family reunion down to the smallest detail. I'd already spent $26,000 on flights for everyone, a week at a luxury resort in Aspen, ski passes, a private chef for Christmas dinner, and gifts for all 5 of Laura's kids. This was supposed to be my way of giving back to my family, especially my parents who'd sacrificed so much to put both Laura and me through college. And now my sister was holding the entire Christmas hostage, unless I agreed to spend my vacation alone, with a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old while everyone else had fun on the slopes. I'm Homer, 32 years old, and I work as a software engineer at a tech company in Seattle. 6 months ago, I received a major promotion and a bonus that changed my financial situation completely. It'd always been comfortable, but this was different. This was the kind of money that let me do something I'd dreamed about for years. Give my family the Christmas they deserved. My parents, both in their mid-60s, had worked blue-collar jobs their entire lives. Dad had been a mechanic. Mom a school secretary. They'd stretched every dollar to make sure Laura and I had opportunities they never had. Laura was 35, 3 years older than me, married to Craig, who managed a car dealership, and she'd chosen to be a stay-at-home mom to their 5 kids. I couldn't sleep that night. Laura's demand kept replaying in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I sat on my couch in the dark, city lights filtering through my apartment windows, trying to understand how this had happened. When had I ever suggested I wanted to spend a week babysitting? I loved my nieces and nephews, sure, but an entire week as their sole caretaker during what was supposed to be a family vacation? That wasn't what I'd signed up for when I booked everything. Around midnight, I called my best friend Marcus. He answered groggily but woke up fast when I explained the situation. Marcus worked in finance and had a sharp mind for seeing through manipulation. He listened to everything, then asked me a question that made my stomach drop. Had Laura told anyone else that I'd volunteered for this arrangement? I realized I didn't know. Shed presented it to me as if it were already decided, but I'd never been part of any conversation where this was discussed. I decided to call my mother. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear the television in the background. I asked her directly about the babysitting situation, trying to keep my voice calm and neutral. There was a long pause before she spoke. She said Laura had mentioned I'd volunteered to watch the kids so the adults could enjoy some ski time together. The way she said it, tentative and uncomfortable, told me she hadn't been entirely comfortable with the arrangement either, but Shed accepted Laura's version of events without questioning it. I told my mother clearly and firmly that I had never volunteered for anything. There was another pause, longer this time. Then she said that Laura had been very stressed lately and really needed this vacation. She mentioned something about financial pressures and how hard it was raising 5 children. I felt my frustration rising. Of course, raising 5 kids was hard, but that didn't give Laura the right to volunteer me for a week of unpaid childcare without my consent. When I pressed my mother on whether she thought it was fair to expect this of me, she sighed and said maybe I should talk to my father. Gerald, my dad, was more direct when I called him 5 minutes later. He admitted straight out that Head thought the babysitting arrangement seemed like a lot to ask, but Laura had insisted it was already settled between us. I told him it absolutely was not settled, that Laura had never asked me. Shed just informed me this was happening. My father was quiet for a moment, then suggested I be flexible for the sake of family harmony. Those words hit me hard. Family harmony. What about my harmony? What about respecting my time, my vacation, my generosity? I hung up feeling worse than before I'd made the calls. Both my parents knew about this arrangement. Both had some level of discomfort with it, but neither had thought to call me and verify that I was actually okay with spending my Christmas as an unpaid nanny. They just accepted Laura's narrative because that was easier than confronting her. That's when I decided to check my email more carefully. I searched for anything from Laura in the past few weeks and found nothing directly to me about Christmas plans. But then my cousin Amy forwarded me something that made my blood run cold. It was a group email Laura had sent to our extended family 2 weeks earlier. In it, she thanked everyone for their understanding and made a special point of thanking me for graciously volunteering to watch the children so the adults could enjoy the slopes without distraction. She'd written it as if I were some kind of saint, sacrificing my vacation for the greater good of the family. It'd never been included in that email thread. Laura had sent it to aunts, uncles, cousins, even some family friends, but not to me. She'd created a public narrative that I was a willing participant in this plan, and she'd done it without my knowledge or consent. I scrolled through the replies. Person after person had responded with messages like, "How wonderful of Homer, and what a generous brother, and the kids are so lucky to have such a devoted uncle." Laura had trapped me. If I backed out now, I wouldn't just be disappointing her. It'd be going back on a promise that the entire extended family believed I'd made. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a simple message asking if he saw what I saw. He called me immediately. His first words were blunt and angry on my behalf. Laura had set me up. She'd created a situation where saying no would make me look like a liar and a flake. Marcus asked me what I was going to do, and I told him I didn't know yet. But I was starting to realize that my $26,000 gift had turned me into a target rather than a generous family member. I woke up the next morning to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. 17 missed calls. 34 text messages. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and started scrolling through them. They were from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Diane, my mother's sister who lived in Florida, had sent a long text about how disappointed she was that I was backing out of my commitment to Laura. Uncle Robert, my father's brother in Texas, had left a voicemail calling me selfish and ungrateful. Cousin Jennifer had posted something on Facebook that didn't name me directly but was clearly about me. Something about people who make promises and break them, and how family should always come first. I felt like I'd woken up in an alternate universe. I hadn't backed out of anything because I'd never agreed to anything in the first place. But somehow, overnight, I'd become the villain in a story I hadn't even known I was part of. I tried to respond to a few of the messages individually, explaining that there had been a misunderstanding, but the responses I got back were dismissive or accusatory. No one wanted to hear my side. They'd already decided I was wrong. Around 10 in the morning, Laura called. Her voice had completely changed from the cold, demanding tone of the night before. Now she sounded sweet, almost tearful. She told me she was sorry if she'd come across too strong, but she was just so stressed and overwhelmed. She talked about how difficult the kids were, how she never got a break, how Craig worked such long hours, and they barely had any time together as a couple. She reminded me of times when we were young and she'd helped take care of me, conveniently ignoring the fact that she was only 3 years older and hardly qualified as a caretaker when we were kids. I tried to explain calmly that I'd never agreed to a week of babysitting. Laura's tone shifted again, faster than I could process. The sweetness vanished, and anger took its place. She asked me point blank how I could spend all this money on a vacation and not be willing to do this one thing for her. I felt the trap closing even tighter. In her mind, and apparently in my whole family's mind, the money I'd spent had created an obligation. I wasn't giving a gift anymore. I was making a payment, and in return, I owed services. I told her as calmly as I could that I'd planned this trip as a gift for the family, not as payment for anything. The resort, the flights, the chef, all of it was meant to be a gesture of love and gratitude. It wasn't meant to come with strings attached, and it certainly wasn't meant to trap me into a week of childcare I'd never agreed to. Laura's response was to hang up on me. 10 minutes later, my mother called. She was crying. Patricia told me that Laura was devastated, that she was threatening not to come to Christmas at all, that I was tearing the family apart over something so small. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and unfamiliar. Something so small? A week of caring for 5 children under the age of 10 was small? I asked my mother directly if she would want to spend her Christmas vacation alone with 5 young kids while everyone else went skiing and had fun. The line went quiet. Then my mother said something that cut deeper than anything else had. She told me that family makes sacrifices. I understood what she meant, but what she didn't seem to understand was that I'd already made my sacrifice. I'd spent $26,000 of my own money to create a beautiful experience for everyone. That was my sacrifice. That was my contribution. Apparently, it wasn't enough. I told my mother that money wasn't supposed to be everything. that this trip was about being together, not about who owed what to whom. She responded in a voice that had gone cold and distant that money wasn't everything, implying somehow that I was the one making it about money. I wanted to scream that Laura was the one who'd made it transactional, not me. But I didn't. I just ended the call. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my planning. I had a folder on my desk with all the booking confirmations. Flights for 9 people. 7 nights at a 5-star resort with 3 suites. Ski passes for the adults. A private chef coming on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Gifts I'd already bought and wrapped for all 5 kids. Plus thoughtful presents for my parents, Laura, and Craig. Everything represented hours of planning and thousands of dollars. All given freely because I loved my family and wanted to do something special. Then my laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from the resort, a reminder that the final payment of $12,000 was due in 48 hours. After that deadline, all deposits would become non-refundable. I stared at that number, $12,000. More money than my parents had probably spent on Christmas in their entire lives combined. And I was about to hand it over for a vacation where I'd apparently be stuck in a hotel room with 5 kids while everyone else enjoyed themselves. I opened Facebook, something I rarely did, and immediately saw Laura's post. She'd written something vague, but pointed about family letting you down right before the holidays and how heartbroken she was. The post already had 63 likes and dozens of comments. I scrolled through them. Person after person was offering her sympathy, telling her she deserved better, asking what had happened. She hadn't named me, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. I closed my laptop and made a decision. I wasn't going to keep trying to defend myself to people who'd already made up their minds. I wasn't going to beg Laura to see my side or plead with my parents to be fair. I was going to take control of the situation in the only way I could. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything that had happened. Something about the whole situation felt off in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Laura's desperation for this vacation, her willingness to manipulate and lie to get it, the way she'd reacted when I'd hesitated about the babysitting. It all seemed like more than just wanting a break from the kids. There was an edge of panic to it that didn't quite make sense. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started thinking about things Laura had said over the past few months. Little comments about money being tight, about needing to watch their budget, about credit issues. At the time, I'd assumed she just meant the normal financial pressures of raising 5 kids. But now I wondered if there was more to it. I logged into our family phone plan account. I'd taken over paying for it a year ago when my parents mentioned they were struggling with the bill. The plan included my line, my parents' phones, and all 5 of Laura's family's lines. 7 phones total. I paid about $300 a month for all of us, and I'd never thought twice about it. But now I pulled up the detailed usage and purchase history for Laura's lines. And what I saw made me sit back in my chair. In the past 6 months alone, Laura had made purchases through the phone account totaling over $4,000. New iPhones for both her and Craig, premium cases and accessories, apps and subscriptions, international calling plans they'd never discussed with me. And beyond the phone charges, I could see patterns in the data usage that told a story of constant online shopping and social media use. I switched to Facebook and started looking at Laura's posts more carefully. Not just the recent drama, but going back months. What I saw was a carefully curated image of a perfect life. Photos of their newly renovated kitchen with high-end appliances. Pictures of the kids in designer clothes. Posts about weekend trips to nearby resort towns. A new leather couch that looked like it cost several $1,000s. Dinner at expensive restaurants. Laura's own wardrobe in photos had clearly been upgraded, with recognizable designer labels visible in several shots. None of this matched someone who was financially struggling. This was someone spending money freely and often. Yet Laura had claimed to both me and our parents that they were under financial pressure. I called Marcus even though it was barely dawn. He answered, used to my odd hours, and I walked him through what I'd found. Marcus, ever the financial analyst, asked the key question that I should have asked myself earlier. Why would someone who supposedly couldn't afford a vacation demand that I babysit instead of just being grateful for a free trip? The answer came to both of us at the same moment. Laura wanted the vacation to look perfect on social media. She wanted the photos, the status, the appearance of a luxury Christmas getaway, but she couldn't afford it herself. So Shed positioned me as her solution. Not just to pay for it, which I'd already done, but to handle the parts that didn't photograph well, like childcare, so she could focus on creating the perfect image. I thought about my parents and remembered something my dad had mentioned months ago in passing. Something about helping Laura out with a loan. I called my father's cell phone. It was early, but I knew he'd be up. Gerald was an early riser. Always had been. When he answered, I didn't ease into it. I asked him directly how much money he and Mom had lent Laura over the years. There was a long silence. Then my father admitted they'd lent her almost $15,000 over the past 2 years. None of it had been paid back. My father immediately started defending her, saying she had 5 kids and expenses were high. I cut him off as gently as I could and told him about the $3,000 couch I'd seen in her Facebook photos from just 2 months ago. My father went quiet. He hadn't known about the couch. I started to see the full pattern now. Laura had learned that she could manipulate family members with guilt about her circumstances. She played the struggling mother card while living well beyond her means, and people felt obligated to help. My parents had given her $15,000 they probably couldn't afford to give. And now Laura had seen my promotion and bonus as her next opportunity. I pulled up the resort website and logged into my reservation account to review the details one more time. That's when I saw something that made my hands shake with anger. There were pending authorization requests on my credit card that I hadn't made. $2,000 for spa treatments, $1,800 for premium ski equipment rentals, $1,200 for upgraded room service packages, all scheduled for our stay, all added to my reservation within the past week. I called the resort immediately, even though it was early in Seattle and very early in Colorado. The night manager answered, and I explained the situation. She pulled up my account and confirmed that someone had called 3 days ago, claiming to be me, and had requested these additions to the reservation. The charges hadn't gone through yet because my credit card company's fraud detection system had flagged them as suspicious and sent me an alert that I apparently hadn't seen in the midst of all the family chaos. The night manager was incredibly professional. She noted in my account that only I could authorize charges, and she added a password requirement for any future changes. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called my credit card company to confirm the fraud block and make sure Laura couldn't try again. The representative I spoke with mentioned that this kind of family fraud was unfortunately common, especially around the holidays. I sat there as the sun came up over Seattle, watching the sky turn from black to deep blue to pale orange, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about a misunderstanding or poor communication anymore. This was about Laura seeing me as a resource to be exploited rather than a brother to be respected. Shed lied to the family about my supposed promise. Shed created a public narrative to trap me. Shed tried to add thousands of dollars in charges to my credit card without permission. And Shed planned to stick me with a week of babysitting while she enjoyed the vacation I'd paid for. The worst part was realizing this probably wasn't new behavior. This was likely a pattern that had been going on for years, and I'd just been too distant or too trusting to see it. My parents had seen it, but had chosen to enable it rather than confront it. And now, because I'd been successful and generous, I'd become Laura's biggest target. I spent that entire day thinking through my options. By evening, I knew what I had to do. I opened my email and started writing. The subject line was simple and clear. Christmas plans. Final decision. I addressed it to Laura, my mother, and my father. I kept the tone calm and factual, laying out everything that had happened from my perspective. I explained that I had never agreed to babysit for a week, that Laura had created a false narrative and spread it to the extended family, without my knowledge or consent, that I had discovered unauthorized charges attempted on my credit card, and that I had spent $26,000 in good faith as a gift to bring the family together. I wrote that I would not be manipulated or disrespected. Then, I gave them a choice. We could all go to Christmas as originally planned with mutual respect and no babysitting demands, or I would cancel everything. I gave them 24 hours to respond. I sent the email just after 6 in the evening. Laura called me within 3 minutes. She was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She called me selfish, cruel, heartless. She accused me of ruining Christmas for her children. She said I was punishing her kids because I was too stubborn to help out. Her voice was shrill with panic, and I realized Shed probably already told Craig and maybe even posted to her friends about the amazing ski vacation they were about to take. I stayed calm, I told her Shed ruined Christmas herself by being dishonest and greedy. Laura's voice changed, became manipulative and wheedling. She said she deserved this vacation, that being a mother was the hardest job in the world, that I couldn't possibly understand how exhausting her life was. I pointed out that I wasn't denying her a vacation. I was denying her free childcare and unauthorized access to my money. Those were two very different things. Laura's tone shifted to threatening. She told me that if I didn't agree to watch the kids, I shouldn't bother coming at all. I wasn't welcome. The words hung in the air between us for a moment. Then I said something I'd been building toward all day. I told her that if I wasn't welcome, then my $26,000 wasn't welcome either. Laura actually laughed. A nervous, disbelieving sound. She told me I was bluffing, that I'd already paid for everything. I let her think that for a moment, then explained calmly that some of the expenses were refundable, and some weren't. The parts that weren't refundable, I'd eat the cost. It would be worth it to not spend a week being disrespected and used. Laura's laugh died. She started to argue, but I cut her off. I told her to think carefully about what she really wanted. Then I hung up. My mother called 6 minutes later. Patricia was angry in a way I rarely heard from her. She accused me of using money as blackmail, of holding Christmas hostage, of being vindictive. I felt tired suddenly, exhausted by having to defend basic self-respect. I told her I wasn't blackmailing anyone. I was simply setting boundaries around my own time and money. Laura had manipulated the situation. I was unmanipulating it. My mother tried the guilt approach. She talked about how disappointed my father would be, how this would devastate Laura's children, how family didn't treat each other this way. I almost laughed at that last one. Family didn't treat each other this way? What about the way Laura had treated me? What about lying, attempting fraud, demanding unreasonable things? That was fine. But me saying no was unforgivable? I told my mother that maybe she should have taught Laura not to bite the hand that feeds her. It came out harsher than I'd intended, but I meant it. My mother sucked in a breath like I'd slapped her, then hung up without another word. My father sent a text an hour later. It was brief. He wrote that I was being unreasonable and that family didn't act like this. I didn't respond. I sat with my decision for another hour, then started making calls. First to the resort. The manager I'd spoken with earlier was sympathetic. She processed the cancellation, explained which charges would be refunded and which wouldn't. I'd lose about $8,000 in non-refundable deposits and fees. I told her to process it anyway. Then I called the airline and canceled 9 tickets. More fees, but some refunds. The private chef I'd hired was actually relieved because she'd been worried about the timing. She refunded me in full minus a small deposit. By midnight, it was done. The Christmas vacation I'd spent 6 months planning and $26,000 funding no longer existed. I'd gotten back about $18,000 in refunds. The other $8,000 was just gone, the cost of respecting myself. In purely financial terms, it was a terrible decision. In every other way that mattered, it felt right. My phone started exploding around 1 in the morning. Laura must have realized I was serious and started texting everyone. Within an hour, I had messages from dozens of relatives. The accusations ranged from childish to cruel. I was called spoiled, entitled, heartless, selfish, petty, vindictive, and worse. Several people told me I'd regret this for the rest of my life. A few said they'd never speak to me again. Laura created a group chat that included what seemed like every single person we were related to. She wrote a long message portraying me as a monster who'd canceled Christmas because I refused to help with childcare. She made it sound like I'd destroyed everything out of spite over being asked to spend a few hours with my nieces and nephews. She didn't mention the unauthorized charges, the lying about my supposed promise, or the $26,000 I'd already spent. Her version made her the victim and me the villain. The worst part was watching people I'd known my whole life believe her without question. Aunts and uncles who'd known me since I was born, cousins I'd grown up with, even family friends who'd attended my college graduation. They all took Laura's side immediately. No one asked for my perspective. No one thought it was strange that I'd supposedly cancel everything over such a small request. They just accepted that I was cruel and left it at that. I turned my phone off around 3 in the morning and tried to sleep. I couldn't. I kept thinking about Christmas morning, about my parents opening gifts I'd carefully chosen, about my nieces and nephews excited about their presents. All of that was gone now, but what hurt more was the realization that my whole family had been willing to sacrifice my dignity and autonomy for Laura's convenience. That hurt worse than any canceled vacation. The next morning, I received a Facebook message from someone I didn't know well. Her name was Ashley, and she was one of Laura's friends. She said she needed to tell me something and felt terrible about staying quiet. I called her immediately, and what she told me made everything even worse. Laura had invited Ashley and her family, 4 people total, to join us at the resort. Laura had told Ashley that I had plenty of money and wouldn't mind a few extra guests. Ashley had assumed this was cleared with me, but after seeing all the Facebook drama, she realized it wasn't. Ashley sent me screenshots of her text conversation with Laura. In one message, Laura had literally written that her brother was loaded and wouldn't even notice a few extra people. Ashley apologized profusely. She said if she'd known it wasn't approved, she never would have agreed. I thanked her for her honesty and told her she had nothing to apologize for. She wasn't the one who'd lied. After I hung up, I sat there trying to process the depth of Laura's entitlement. She hadn't just planned to use me as free childcare. She hadn't just tried to charge thousands of dollars to my credit card without permission. She'd also invited her friends to a vacation I was paying for without even asking me. In Laura's mind, my success and my money were apparently community property that she could distribute as she saw fit. I thought about responding publicly, about telling my side of the story to counter Laura's narrative, but I realized it wouldn't matter. The people who'd taken her side without hearing from me weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in the drama and in having someone to blame. If I defended myself, it'd just be prolonging the conflict. So, I did something that felt more powerful. I stayed silent. I didn't engage with the group chat, didn't respond to the accusations, didn't try to win anyone over. I just let them think whatever they wanted to think. 5 days passed. It blocked most of my extended family on social media and muted the group chat Laura had created. I spent time with Marcus and his girlfriend Sydney, who'd been incredibly supportive through everything. We had dinner at their place one night, and Sydney said something that stuck with me. She pointed out that not a single person in my family had asked why Id said no. They'd just assumed I was wrong and moved on from there. She was right. No one had been curious about my reasons or my perspective. They'd taken Laura's word as gospel and condemned me without trial. On the 6th day, my mother called. Her voice was panicked and tearful. My father had experienced chest pains and had been rushed to the hospital. She was crying, and between sobs, she said that the stress I'd caused had given him a heart attack. I felt my stomach drop. Despite everything, I loved my father. I immediately booked the next flight to Colorado, threw clothes in a bag, and headed to the airport. The flight felt endless. I kept thinking about the last conversation I'd had with my dad. The text where Head called me unreasonable. I regretted not calling him back, not trying one more time to make him understand. When I landed in Denver, I rented a car and drove straight to the hospital where my parents lived, a small city about 2 hours from Denver proper. I walked into the hospital room to find my mother sitting by my father's bed. Gerald looked tired but stable. Laura was there too, along with Craig. The moment Laura saw me, she stood up, her face flushed with anger. She started to make a scene, raising her voice about how I had some nerve showing up after what I'd done to Dad. I ignored her completely and walked past her to my father's bedside. Gerald looked at me, and I saw disappointment in his eyes. He asked me in a weak voice why I couldn't have just helped my sister. I felt exhausted suddenly, tired of explaining, tired of defending basic self-respect. But I did it one more time. I told him about the unauthorized charges Laura had tried to make to my credit card. I told him about her lying to the family about my supposed promise to babysit. I told him about her inviting friends to the vacation without asking me. I laid it all out clearly and calmly. My father looked surprised by some of this information. Laura immediately jumped in, her voice high and defensive. She called me a liar, said I was making things up to justify my cruelty. I pulled out my phone and showed my father the fraud alert from my credit card company. The email thread Ashley had forwarded me. The resort's notes about the unauthorized charge attempts. Laura's face went pale. Craig, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. He looked at Laura with an expression I couldn't quite read and asked her what she'd done. Laura tried to deflect, to minimize, to make excuses. But Craig pressed her. His voice got harder, more insistent. He wanted answers. That's when someone else entered the room. It was Aunt Margaret. my mother's older sister. Margaret was 68 years old and had always been the matriarch of the family. She was respected, even feared a little, because she had a way of seeing through nonsense and calling people out regardless of who they were. She'd been listening from the doorway, and now she walked in with purpose. Margaret looked at me, then at Laura, then at my parents. She said she'd been watching the whole mess unfold on Facebook for the past week. She'd stayed quiet because she wanted to see how it would play out, wanted to see who would do the right thing. Her voice was calm but carried weight. She said she'd called the resort yesterday, pretending to be a potential customer inquiring about booking policies. She'd asked specifically if there were any notes on my reservation. Laura's face went from pale to white. Margaret continued without mercy. The resort had told her about the unauthorized charge attempts. They'd also mentioned that someone had called claiming to be me and had tried to add 3 extra rooms for additional guests. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Margaret looked directly at Laura. She said that Laura wasn't just asking her brother to babysit. She was trying to steal from him. Patricia gasped. The word steal hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Laura started crying, but they were the manipulative tears I'd seen before. She tried to make herself the victim again, saying she just wanted one nice vacation, that she did everything for everyone, that she deserved this. Margaret cut her off. His grip was weak but sincere. He said 2 words that meant everything. Sorry. Patricia looked at me with tears streaming down her face, and I could see that she was finally understanding the position Laura had put me in. Margaret patted my shoulder and told me I'd done the right thing. She said that sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices. The hospital room felt smaller suddenly, crowded with tension and unspoken truths. Craig stood up and asked Laura the question that had apparently been building in him for a while. He wanted to know exactly how much debt they were in. Laura didn't want to answer. She looked away, tears still streaming, but staying silent. Craig's voice got harder. He repeated the question, adding that he deserved to know the truth about their finances. Laura finally admitted it. $38,000 in credit card debt. Craig actually stumbled back a step. He asked how that was even possible, saying he saw the credit card statements every month. That's when Laura confessed to having secret credit cards. She'd been opening accounts in her name alone, hiding the statements, lying about purchases. When Craig asked about specific items, Laura would say they were gifts from friends or deeply discounted sales. None of it was true. Craig looked devastated. He said they had 5 children, 5 kids who needed stability and security, and Laura had been shopping like they were millionaires. Laura tried to shift blame to him, saying he didn't make enough money. Craig's response was measured but firm. He said he made $75,000 a year. They should be comfortable, not drowning in debt. The truth came spilling out of Laura then, ugly and desperate. She'd been trying to keep up with her friends on social media. Women she'd known since high school who'd had married wealthy men or had successful careers. Every vacation photo they posted, every designer handbag, every perfect family moment, it had eaten at Laura until she'd started creating her own perfect life on credit. The vacation ID offered was supposed to be her crowning achievement, the ultimate proof that she was just as successful and blessed as everyone else. When Laura saw my promotion and bonus, she hadn't seen a brother's good fortune. She'd seen her solution. If she could just get one big payout from me, she could pay down enough debt to hide it a little longer, have the perfect Christmas photos, and maintain her illusion. The babysitting demand had been calculated. If I said yes, she got her perfect vacation and free childcare. If I said no, she could play the victim and maybe guilt me into giving her money directly. Either way, she'd planned to use me. Craig told her he wanted a separation. He needed time to think about whether he could trust her again. Laura panicked and begged him not to leave. My mother tried to calm everyone down, but my father spoke with a firmness I hadn't heard from him in years. He said what Laura had done to me was unforgivable. She'd lied to the family, manipulated everyone, and tried to steal from her own brother. Then he said something that clearly hurt Laura deeply. He told her he was ashamed of her. Those words hung in the air. Laura looked at our father like head struck her. She'd always been the golden child in some ways. The firstborn, the one who'd given our parents grandchildren. But in that moment, she could see that she'd lost their respect, along with everyone else's. Patricia, still crying, turned to me and apologized. She said they should have listened to me from the beginning, should have questioned Laura's version of events, should have protected me instead of pressuring me. I felt vindicated but also deeply sad. This wasn't how Eid wanted to be proven right. I'd wanted a happy family Christmas, not this hospital room confrontation with everyone's worst traits on display. The family left the hospital after a while. Margaret stayed with us and facilitated what she called a necessary conversation. Over the next few hours, more truth emerged. Laura had been manipulating family members for years. She'd tell our parents she needed money for the kids, school supplies, and spend it on clothes for herself. She'd convince cousins to lend her money with sob stories about medical bills that didn't exist. She'd learned that playing the struggling mother card gave her access to people's wallets and their sympathy. My success had just made me the biggest mark. Extended family members who'd attacked me on social media were conspicuously silent now. Margaret had apparently made some calls and shared what she'd learned. The narrative was shifting. People were starting to realize they'd been manipulated too, but none of them apologized to me. They just quietly deleted their comments and pretended they'd never said anything. Margaret suggested I tell my side publicly, but I refused. I told her I didn't need to defend myself to people who'd never asked for my side in the first place. The people who mattered, my parents and Margaret, now knew the truth. Everyone else could think whatever they wanted. Marcus had taught me that some battles weren't worth fighting, and this was one of them. Instead, I made a different decision. I told my parents I was going to book a small cabin for Christmas, something simple and affordable, just a few hours away. It wouldn't be Aspen. It wouldn't be luxury. It would just be quiet family time. I looked at them and said, Laura wasn't invited. Not as punishment, but as a boundary. I needed space from her, and they needed to stop enabling her behavior. My parents agreed immediately. Gerald said they understood and respected my decision. Patricia nodded, looking exhausted but accepting. When Laura heard about the new plan, she broke down again. But this time, her tears seemed different. There was genuine regret mixed with the desperation. She was starting to understand what she'd lost. Craig took the kids to stay with his parents. He told Laura she needed to figure herself out before he'd discuss their marriage. Laura was left alone with the consequences of her choices, and for perhaps the first time in years, no one was rushing to rescue her from them. Margaret told me privately that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone hit bottom. Only then can they start to rebuild. I booked a cabin online that night. It cost $2,000 for the week, a fraction of what I'd spent on Aspen. It was small, cozy, with a fireplace and views of snow-covered trees. I sent my parents the details and told them this was what Christmas would be. No conditions, no obligations, just us. My father hugged me before I left the hospital. He said I was a better man than he'd given me credit for, and that he was proud of me. Christmas week arrived cold and clear. I drove to Colorado and met my parents at the cabin. It was everything I'd hoped the Aspen trip would be, but in a completely different way. The cabin was small enough that we couldn't avoid each other, which meant we actually had to talk. Really talk. For the first time in years, we cooked meals together in the tiny kitchen. My mother made her famous pot roast, the recipe her mother had taught her. My father showed me how to make my grandfather's stuffing, something I'd never learned before. We spent Christmas Eve playing board games at the wooden table by the fireplace. We talked about memories I'd forgotten, stories from when Laura and I were kids, before money and social media and keeping up appearances had complicated everything. My father told me about the early years of his marriage, how he and my mother had struggled financially but had been happy because they'd been honest with each other. He admitted he'd let Laura get away with too much over the years because he'd felt guilty about not being able to give us more when we were growing up. My mother confessed that she'd known Laura was manipulative but had hoped it would get better with time. She'd wanted to believe that having children would mature Laura, that Craig would be a good influence, that things would work themselves out. She apologized for not standing up for me sooner, for choosing the path of least resistance instead of doing what was right. I told her I understood. Family dynamics were complicated, and changing patterns that had been set for years was hard. On Christmas morning, we exchanged small, thoughtful gifts. I gave my parents a framed photograph from my college graduation, all three of us together, young and hopeful. My mother started crying when she opened it. She said she'd forgotten how happy we'd all looked that day. My mother gave me a handwritten letter, several pages long, thanking me for my strength and integrity. She wrote about how proud she was of the man I'd become and how sorry she was for not seeing what Laura had been doing to me. My father gave me his father's watch, A simple piece with a leather band that had been in our family for 3 generations. He said Id earned it. He told me that real character showed when someone could be generous without expecting anything in return, but also strong enough to set boundaries when that generosity was abused. He said Id shown both, and that made him prouder than any amount of money I could have spent. We had a beautiful, peaceful Christmas. There was no drama, no expectations, no manipulation, just 3 people who loved each other, spending time together without conditions or demands. We took walks in the snow. We watched old movies. We talked about everything and nothing. It was the best Christmas Id ever had, not because of what we did, but because of what we didn't have to navigate around. On the last day at the cabin, Craig called me. He thanked me for standing my ground. He said Laura's breakdown had actually been the beginning of something important. She'd started therapy and financial counseling. She'd gotten a part-time job and was slowly paying down the debt. She was a different person than she'd been a month ago. He said he didn't know if their marriage would survive, but at least Laura was finally being honest. I appreciated the update, but told Craig I needed more time before I could consider rebuilding a relationship with Laura. He understood. He said he'd tell her I wished her well but wasn't ready to talk. Craig said that was fair, and he didn't blame me. Some bridges take a long time to rebuild once they've been burned. Margaret called me the day after Christmas to check on how things had gone. I told her about the peaceful time with my parents, and she said she was glad. Then she said something I've thought about many times since. She told me I'd taught the family an important lesson, that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just obligation dressed up in family dynamics. Real love includes boundaries, accountability, and the courage to say no when something isn't right. I realized she was correct. I'd spent so much of my life equating love with accommodation, thinking that being a good son and brother meant always saying yes, always being flexible, always prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own dignity. But that wasn't love. That was just conflict avoidance. Real love meant caring enough about people to be honest with them, even when that honesty was uncomfortable. 6 months passed. I was at a coffee shop near my apartment in Seattle when I got a text from an unknown number. It was Laura. The message was simple and direct. She wrote that she was sorry, that I'd been right about everything, that she didn't expect forgiveness but needed me to know she understood what she'd done. She said she was working on being better, on being honest, on living within her means. She ended the text saying she hoped I was happy. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to tell her I appreciated her apology. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and manipulated, needed more time. I didn't respond right away, but I didn't delete the message either. I saved it. Maybe someday I'd be ready to talk to Laura again. Maybe someday we'd rebuild some kind of relationship. But that day wasn't today, and I was okay with that. That same week, I had dinner with my parents at a restaurant halfway between Colorado and Seattle. We'd started doing this monthly, making time to see each other without the weight of family drama. They told me Laura had paid back $3,000 of what she owed them. She'd committed to a payment plan, $50 a month, which would take years but at least showed she was serious. My mother asked carefully if I'd ever consider talking to Laura again. I thought about it and told her honestly that maybe someday, but not yet. And I said that was okay, that I got to decide what my boundaries were and when I was ready to adjust them. My father reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He said it was absolutely okay, that I got to decide the terms of any relationship I had, family or not. I realized in that moment how much had changed. My parents had learned to respect my autonomy instead of pressuring me to keep the peace. They'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is support their child's boundaries rather than asking them to sacrifice for family harmony. And I'd learned that I could love my family while also protecting myself from being hurt by them. I used to think family meant accepting anything from the people you love. But that Christmas taught me something different. Real love includes boundaries. Real family means respect goes both ways. The best gift I ever gave myself wasn't the $26,000 I was willing to spend. It was the self-respect to walk away when I wasn't valued. Some people will call you selfish for protecting yourself. Let them, because the people who truly love you will understand that you can't pour from an empty cup. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst behavior. That Christmas in the cabin with my parents, no luxury resort, no expensive gifts, just honesty and presence, was the best Christmas of my life. Because it was real, and real is always better than perfect. The next Christmas came around, and I hosted a small gathering at my apartment in Seattle. My parents flew in and stayed with me. Marcus and Sydney came over. And surprisingly, Craig came with 2 of his kids. Laura was working that day and didn't come, respecting the boundaries I'd set. My apartment was modestly decorated. I'd made a simple dinner. There were no expensive gifts, no perfect photos for social media. Just people who genuinely cared about each other, spending time together. I looked around my living room at the people gathered there and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Complete, uncomplicated peace. I'd learned that saying no to disrespect was actually saying yes to real love. And that was the greatest gift of all. I'd learned that generosity means nothing if it comes with the expectation that you'll accept mistreatment in return. I'd learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about mutual respect and genuine care. My niece, Craig's 8-year-old daughter Emma, came up to me and asked if I was happy. I picked her up and told her I was very happy. She asked why, and I thought about how to explain it in a way she'd understand. I told her that sometimes being happy means making hard choices that feel bad at first, but are right in the long run. She nodded like she understood, even though she probably didn't fully. But someday, she would. Someday, she'd face her own hard choices. And maybe she'd remember this conversation and find the strength to choose self-respect. As everyone left that evening, my father pulled me aside. He told me he'd been thinking a lot about the past year, about everything that had happened. He said, watching me stand up for myself had made him realize how often he'd failed to stand up for what was right because it was easier to keep the peace. He said he was trying to be braver now, to speak up when things weren't right, to value honesty over harmony. I told him I was proud of him. He laughed and said he was supposed to say that to me, not the other way around. My mother hugged me goodbye and whispered that she loved me and was sorry for all the years she'd asked me to be smaller so Laura could be comfortable. She said she was learning that real love meant celebrating my strength, not asking me to hide it. I hugged her back and told her we were all learning, all growing, and that was what mattered. After everyone left, I sat alone in my apartment with the lights from my small Christmas tree casting soft colors across the room. I thought about where I'd been a year ago, planning that extravagant Aspen trip, thinking money could solve everything, thinking generosity would bring my family closer. I'd been wrong about the method, but right about the intention. Family was important, love was important, but not at the cost of self-respect. I'd learned that you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. For years, I'd accepted being overlooked, undervalued, and taken for granted because I didn't want to rock the boat. But boats are meant to be rocked sometimes. Standing still in toxic water doesn't keep you safe. It just lets the poison seep in deeper. Sometimes, love looks like conflict. Sometimes, care looks like consequences. And sometimes the most generous thing you can do is refuse to fund someone's dysfunction. Looking back, canceling that vacation was the best money I ever didn't spend. Those $8,000 in lost deposits bought me something more valuable than any resort stay ever could. They bought me self-respect. They bought me boundaries. They bought me a family that finally understood I wasn't a resource to be exploited, but a person to be valued. And that was worth every penny. I hope this story makes you think about your own relationships and boundaries. Have you ever been in a situation where family expected too much from you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to hear more real-life stories about family, boundaries, and finding your way through difficult situations. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for yourself, even when family makes it hard. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings you comfort if you're facing something similar, and courage if you need to make a hard choice. Remember, you deserve respect, especially from the people who claim to love you most. Wishing you all peaceful holidays filled with genuine love and mutual respect.